We acknowledge the first Australians as the traditional custodians of the continent, whose culture is the oldest living culture in human history. We pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and we respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land. We extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. They share the memories, traditions and hopes of the traditional ancestors with the new generations today and in the future. We would also like to thank them for looking after this land for thousands of years.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to SciFest 2023. We are very excited to have you here for our key session for today with Megan from Australian National Maritime Museum. For those of you that have just done the quiz as well today, congratulations and well done. We were very impressed with all of your quick responses. So Megan is here to talk about some technology with Beneath the Waves. So I will leave you to Megan. Enjoy your session.
All right. Thank you so much and welcome everyone. So of course, my name is Megan. I'm the Digital Education Officer here at the Australian National Maritime Museum, and we are so amazingly excited, just over the moon, that to be able to celebrate Science Week with you all, and to be able to take you beneath the sea with ROVs, because Science Week this year is all about innovation technology, and this is some pretty cool technology that helps scientists explore our oceans. Before I go any further, however, I want to welcome you to the Australian National Maritime Museum. So for those of you who have, you might be around Sydney, might have visited before or come on a holiday, this is the amazing, beautiful Maritime Museum where I'm speaking to you from today. And of course, we are Australia's National Maritime Museum, and we are absolutely delighted to speak to students, all of you from all across Australia. And hopefully you'll be able to join us either virtually again in the future or actually come and visit us. We do also want to mirror the acknowledgement at the start of the session by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of the Bamal, the earth, and the Badu and waters on which I get to work, and acknowledge all traditional custodians of the lands and waters throughout Australia. So what is an ROV? Today I'm going to be talking all about this thing called an ROV. And I've got one here next to me as well. But an ROV is a remote controlled vehicle. So our ROV, of course, is driven by a remote. And this is one I have here. So it means that we can actually control it. So it's kind of like a robot, but we're actually doing all of the thinking for it. It's just following our directions. And here at the museum, we've actually had two different types of ROVs that we let our kids and families and school students come and drive in various programs. The first ROVs we had are these white ones. And they are very much an amazing ROV to kind of get us started. Well, I think my screen just did something there. Hopefully you didn't see that. Our ROVs, they drive through the water. You can see it's got some propellers. So it's got a propeller in here that helps it go up and down, as well as these propellers at the back. And it's got a camera on the front, which is really, really important, because sometimes you drive at places where you can't see it. You might drive it deep down into the ocean. You might drive it around a corner. And so you use this camera here to be able to know where you're going. It's also got lights as well, so if it gets a bit dark. And so this was our first ROVs from a brand that unfortunately no longer exists anymore, but they were a great starting point. And now we have some bit more heavy duty ROVs from a company called Deep Trekker in Canada. And they actually allow us to explore all the way around our museum. It has lots and lots of important parts. And Sorry, my computer's doing something weird there. And it comes together, packed up in a nice box so it can all stay safe. Of course, with any technology, it's important to look after it. And the ROVs are no different. So we make sure that after we finish using them, we clean them all off, we wash them, give them a bath, make sure they're all dry, recharge them for the next person and put them away in their box. But what tech does our ROVs have? So I'm sure some of you love technology, love computers, love specs. So the deep trekker ROVs that we have can go up to 200 meters below the surface of the water. That's 200 meters straight down. They weigh 8.2 kilos, so that's pretty heavy. But did you know they actually float? Because they've got a big bubble of air in them. So we actually have to add additional weights to make them go down in the water. They have 2 or 3 thrusters, a full HD camera, they have a controller, and they work for about 8 hours of battery life at any one time. And it takes an hour and a half to recharge them. So these ROVs have been super useful for us to be able to share our ocean, our harbour, with other people. But what do you think we might actually see? So this is where I would love for you guys to actually, as a class, think about what we might see with an ROV, and your teacher or one of your classmates, a student, or if you might be a homeschool student, you can type it into the chat there. What might we see with ROVs, with remote operated vehicles under the water? And you might also come up with some other questions. If there's any questions that you have for me throughout the session, we'll have some Q&A at the end, and those you can put in the question and answer, the Q&A box. But I can see lots of people popping stuff into the chat. So we're putting this answer into the chat, and I can see, multiple people have written shipwrecks. Yes, we can definitely find shipwrecks, and I'll give you a great example at the end of the session. Plants and fish, sea life, fish, coral and plants. Oh, we've got some specific different types of fish. New different animals under the sea. Nick, that's a great answer. Definitely, scientists find new different animals under the sea. I also have someone saying rocks and ocean geology. Can definitely look at rocks and ocean geology. Oh, and we can see pipelines. Kate, that's a great answer. We can see man-made things under the water as well. You guys have so many. Oh, turtles, definitely. I love turtles. More shipwrecks, anchors, sharks. Oh, you guys have so many answers there. And rubbish. So we do sometimes find stuff that we don't like. We find rubbish. And I've even seen a broken chair in the harbour right next to our museum that someone's just thrown in the harbour. So rubbish, lots of different things. Why don't I actually show you a bit about what it's like to drive an ROV? Now, don't worry, this video doesn't have any sound. It's not broken. But this is actually showing you what it's like to use our ROVs. So last week I took our ROV and I went down to one of our wharfs. That's why it's bobbing up and down in the water. And we pop it into the water. And it's connected to our remote control, and we can actually drive it around the harbour. So let's go and actually see. You can see on the screen there, you can kind of keep an eye on what you're doing so you don't run into anything. And we can have a look at the seawall. And this was high tide, so I can have a look at the oysters that are growing on the seawall that's around our museum. And as we go down, the controller tells me how deep we're going. We can go down and we can go down and we can see different types of plants. I like this type of seaweed that's growing on the wall. It looks really interesting. and we can go down and we can find the kelp that's towards the bottom and the different types of mosses and things that are growing on the seawall. And you can actually see how the sea life changes at different depths, which is really, really fascinating. And as we float back up, you'll see the different beautiful shapes of the kelp and the seaweed. And this is literally growing just next to our cafe here at the museum. We also sometimes see different creatures that are actually living here as well. And we see man-made things. We can actually go and we can have a look at our boats under the sea. We can have a look here. You can see some different ropes and pipes and things that are actually under the wharfs, the pylon that's holding the wharf up. We can double check it's not got nothing's got a hole in it, nothing's broken. And a lot of the times we're looking at a whole lot of blue. I noticed someone in the comments there said water. We see a lot of water. We see a lot of blue. And something that's really fascinating that the ROVs have is a compass, which is really useful to be able to know which direction you're going when it's all blue and you kind of lose track of where you are. So in the ROVs at the bottom like this, we actually can't see it from the surface. And you can see all of the different seaweed. And I think there might be, there we go, some fish. So here, even just around the museum in Darling Harbour, we see a whole lot of fish. And you know what I've also found? Someone in the chat there has said, actually, valuables. I've seen people who've lost their phone and we've gone to try and find them with the ROV as well. We've been able to find them, but we haven't been able to pick them up, unfortunately, yet. Motors under the ships. So that's from Bundina. Yeah, we actually do look at the motors or the propellers of our ships. We can look at their hulls to make sure they don't have any holes and things like that. And then after we're finished, we drive it back to us and we can pick it up. I'll then take it up and make sure we give it a bath in fresh water because, of course, salt water, we don't want salt water to rust any of the parts there. So we also take it to different places. And actually, this is actually what it's like at Bondi. So for Bondi, we took it to this really shallow ocean pool and look at all of those fish. It almost looks like a fish tank. But these were just in a little ocean rock pool at Bondi Beach. And we've got very different types of seagrasses, very different types of plants, different types of rocks and soils and sand that we're driving around. And you can see all those fish there. So that's something you probably never noticed if you were swimming in these rock pools off Bondi. There were families that were playing, but there were all of these fish that are right there where even where there's lots and lots of humans. So we found lots and lots of different things. So I've shown you what the ROV sees, but what does the ROV look like when it's moving underwater? Let's have a watch. So this is one ROV taking a video of a different ROV, and you can see it's basically just swimming around. And it's got this long string that comes out of the back, a long cord that's coming out of the back. It's black right where it's connected, and then it turns into a yellow cord that connects the ROV to the controller. So once again, pop your answers in the chat. Why do you think there's a cord connecting my ROV? Why do you think there's a cord connected to the ROV? And it actually also connects to my controller. So we've got a few different answers, and there's actually multiple correct answers there. Oh, wow, lots coming in there. So a lot of you have said it's so it doesn't get lost. And that is an absolutely amazing answer. Yes, it's so that we don't lose it, and we can. It's why the tether actually, where it's connected to the ROV, is covered in this black material. It's actually like Kevlar, and it's super strong, and we can actually pull on it and it won't break. So we can pull the ROV back if we need to. And it's so that we can kind of follow it so we know where it's gone. So it does help us find it. So it helps it doesn't get lost. But in fact, the tether can actually get caught on things. So sometimes it actually can help it get a bit stuck. So you don't lose it if it malfunctions. Thank you. That's a really good one. So that's Mr. Lade's class popped that one in. Bundina's written, so it doesn't go out of control. So yeah, it's actually to control it. All of the instructions go from my ROV through the cord, from my controller, through the cord to my ROV. Because if you've ever seen a drone in the sky, they use radio waves. But radio waves don't work as well in the water. And if it got too far away, it would stop working, or it wouldn't work particularly well. So to make sure we can keep nice in control, and to send the instructions to the ROV, and for the ROV to send the video, the pictures, back to the controller, it is really, really super duper important. Now, it can also provide a little bit of power just to make sure that it doesn't run out. But that means you also have to plug the remote control into a power point. So you can do that, but most of the time we use its battery power. I am overwhelmed by the number of amazing answers in the chat there. Thank you so much. So we've been thinking about these ROVs, but these ROVs are made by engineers. Engineers are a type of scientist who help invent things. What are the challenges might the engineers have to solve? So we've talked about getting the communication between the controller and the ROV. We've got a tether, a cable. What other challenges might engineers building ROVs have to solve? Oh, so Kiralee, they have to stop it falling apart in the water from Kangaroo Island. Thank you. Yes, so we've got to make sure it stays together. That's a great problem. So we're not just going to use blue tack to hold it together. Everything is super sealed together so that it doesn't fall apart. Both Bungendore and Bundina schools have actually said to make it waterproof, weatherproof. And that's really, really important as well. So our controller here is actually water resistant. So it's okay if it's raining. I've used it when it's raining and it's totally fine. The water doesn't get into it. And then our ROV itself is in the water. So we have to make sure that the water doesn't get to any of the electronics inside. So this is all sealed. So that's a really important challenge that the engineers have to come up with a way to seal it all. And then if something breaks, they have to be able to get into it and actually be able to fix it and then reseal it so that it stays whole. So yeah, the same thing about keeping it all together. We have Addison saying losing parts underwater. So we've got to make sure stuff doesn't fall off. So everything's connected on and connected really, really well. This is an important one. So A. Johnson, how to protect the battery. Yeah, because we don't want the battery to get wet and we don't want the battery to get damaged if it gets poked or something. Batteries are actually really dangerous, so we've got to protect it. So it's actually got a really hard shell. It's got a few little dings, but it's not damaged, and it's really, really hard to damage it. So we've got to make sure our ROVs are nice and protected so the batteries and all of the other electronics don't get damaged. So Miss McMahon's class, installing a good camera. Yes, that's very important challenge. So people who build ROVs might also have to work with engineers who build other sorts of technologies to get a nice camera in there. Oh, I'm trying to get through all your messages. You've got lots and lots and lots of different messages there. And if you've got any questions for us to answer later, make sure you pop them in the Q&A so we don't miss them. Oh, it might get disconnected. Yeah, so that's a challenge we have to be able to solve. Can it restart? Can we turn it off and on again in the water? And with this one, we can actually. If there's an issue with it, sometimes we'll turn it off and then we can turn it back on again. But we're going to make sure that it doesn't come unconnected. So it's firmly attached. The tether is firmly attached, so the tether itself can't come apart. But sometimes the computer needs to get turned off and on again. This is an interesting answer here. It doesn't get eaten. So yes, we have to make sure that it's not, if we make it smaller, we have to make sure it doesn't get eaten by an animal. So that might also be about driving it not near any big scary animals. Oh, and Angus Williams has said it needs to be strong so it's not damaged by water pressure. And water pressure is one of the big issues with ROVs. It's why this ROV can only go down to 200 meters. So this ROV, if it goes any further down from 200 meters, the pressure, the water pressure, the heaviness of the water above it could crush it and could break it. So other ROVs that scientists use are sometimes made to be able to withstand much greater pressures to go down to the deepest parts of our ocean. Oh, it needs to have a nice strong motor so it's not impacted by the tides and the currents. It needs to float. It needs to have buoyancy so it doesn't sink, but it also needs to have enough weight so that it can go down. So it's about that balance. I'm going to read two more. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to get to everyone. Oh, I like this answer here, adding negatively to the ecosystem. So we have to make sure it's not leaking anything. It's not going to be putting any additional rubbish. It's not going to be damaging anything in the ecosystem as it drives around. So we're not going to crash into things. Yeah, and making the view clear. So Bungendorf, thank you for that. Yeah, so we've got a nice window here that the camera can actually have a look through to see. So all these different engineering things, and it needs to have sensors. So this ROV here has things that can, for example, can sense how deep it's gone, has a compass so it knows which way it's pointing. But you can also get other ones that have other sorts of sensors that scientists can use to take lots of different types of measurements. All right, thank you for all of those amazing answers. Yes, all of these things are stuff that engineers and scientists think about when designing ROVs. But let's actually have a look at some other ROVs and how other scientists and other people use them. So this ROV here is actually an ROV called Sebastian. And Sebastian works for the Schmidt Ocean Institute and works off a ship called Research Vessel Falkor. And if you look at how big this ROV is compared to the people, it's like a small car. So lots of these big scientific research ships will have ROVs that are about the size and the weight of a small car. And they are designed to go a lot deeper down. Sebastian can go 4,500 meters down into the ocean. And a lot of people earlier have said that it goes looking for animals, and it does. So it can actually go swimming around and it can find lots of different animals, like a little seahorse. So it's actually here, it's found a little tiny seahorse in a marine park, the Coral Reef Marine Park, where it also has to be super careful that it doesn't negatively impact the environment. So it drives around really, really carefully. It can also go really deep in the water and find things like this beautiful glass octopus. So the RV Falcor and Sebastian actually sometimes even do live streams online where you can actually go on and you can watch as Sebastian drives around. So Sebastian can actually connects up to the boat, and then the boat connects with the internet to be able to stream what it actually sees. So lots of different scientific research organizations have ROVs to be able to do a lot of this research. They can go really deep, and it's a lot easier than having huge teams of scuba divers that actually go and dive around, having a robot and bits and technology that can actually help make our life easier. And we also said at the beginning that we can use it to find shipwrecks. Some people might have seen last year that Ernest Shackleton's ship Endurance was found beneath the Antarctic ice, and this was done using ROVs. And I actually have a model of the Endurance here. It's a tall ship that Ernest Shackleton and his team of explorers were sailing in when they tried to go to Antarctica, and everything went wrong. They got stuck in some ice and the ship sank. Thankfully, they all survived. Amazing story. But the ship sunk and we didn't know where it was for a very, very long time. And now scientists used ROVs to actually go into the freezing cold waters, a huge distance down under the water, to find Endurance. And not only have we found this very interesting historical wreck, it also has a lot of sea life growing on it now. And scientists can actually look at how it's becoming its own marine ecosystem. And the last example I'm going to share with you is actually from the movie Titanic. In your classes, put your hands up if anyone has heard of the movie Titanic. So you might not have watched it yet. It's a little bit of an older movie. But Titanic is about the ship that was on its maiden voyage and tragically sunk after hitting an iceberg. The maker of this movie, James Cameron, actually built an ROV and looked at the plans of the Titanic, the real ship, and actually built his ROV to fit in the window. So he could actually take an ROV, drive it into the window of the real Titanic shipwreck, and actually have a look inside the shipwreck. So that was an engineering challenge that he had to solve. He had to make sure that everything would fit through the window, would not damage the shipwreck, and that it had a really good high quality camera to take videos that he could actually use in his movie. So all of these different reasons scientists use ROVs, remote operated vehicles, and technology to actually explore our oceans. And of course, we use them here at the museum to do some things, but mostly because they're a whole lot of fun. And one of these ROVs even has a claw, which means we can go and we can even pick up samples and things like that. So this has just been a bit of an introduction into one type of technology scientists are using to actually explore our oceans. And here at Darling Harbour, we're using it to find lots of cool stuff, like different types of fish and all sorts of things around our museum. So in a moment, we're going to get to some questions. Please, I can already see lots in the Q&A there. But you can just see some of the fish that we found around our museum. This is in Sydney Harbour. All of these fish are living in Sydney Harbour. So if we got any questions, I might actually stop sharing my screen so I can see all of your questions there. Oh, here's a good question from Bundina Public School. Is the cord stretchy? It isn't. It needs to be very, very strong. So I can actually, I have a whole reel of cord here. And the yellow one is, it's just a wire covered in plastic insulation. And the black bit is nice and strong, so it's not going to break. So it's a black cover that's over the yellow cord so that it can't break. But it's not stretchy at all. It's not moving. I can even pick up the ROV out of the water. If I'm up on a wharf, I can pick it up using the black cord. And it's totally fine for the cord to get wet. The cord is also totally waterproof. So here is a question from Chris. What is the best shape to build an ROV? And the answer here is that there isn't an answer. There isn't a best shape to build an ROV. You can see here, our older ROVs were built to be very streamlined. They're very far. They're a little bit more fast and streamlined through the water. They could even do little jumps. And so they move through the water quite nicely. But there's not a whole lot of room in here for lots of technology. So they're quite a simple design. Our ROVs here are actually quite round. They're less streamlined, but they actually have a nice big hole in the middle for lots of smart technology. And this one's also interesting because it actually has a weight in the bottom of it, which is what helps it dive down and surface up. So it uses a different system on how it dives and surfaces. And you saw the picture of Sebastian off RV Falcor. It was big and kind of squarish because it mainly goes down, 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 super, super deep. So it actually doesn't need to be particularly streamlined. So there isn't a best shape for an ROV. It all depends on what it needs to do. Some ROVs are nice and streamlined and round and long, particularly if they need to move very far through the water. And others might not need to be super fast. It depends on what you're going to use it for. So that was a really interesting question there. Oh, this is an interesting question. What if an animal gets into the ROV? Well, that's going to be a bit of a problem because then the ROV would break. So if anything gets into the ROV, whether it's an animal, whether it's water, it's not going to be a good thing. So if we know that the seal is broken, we can actually not use it, send it back to the people who made it, and they can very carefully take it apart, dry everything out, and re-put on the waterproof seals so that it stays nice and dry. And thankfully, it's very, very thick, so animals really can't get into it. But yeah, we don't want it to get damaged because electricity and water doesn't mix. We've got to make sure it stays nice and sealed. So yes, that's another question as well we have. What happens if water gets into the air pocket? If the water gets into the air pocket, we stop using it, we pick it up, we take it, and we send it back to the people who made it so they can very carefully take it apart and fix it. Here's a question from Nick. What is the most interesting thing you found in the waters around the Maritime Museum? There's lots of different interesting things we found in the waters around the Maritime Museum. Some of them are natural things. We found so many more different species of fish and seaweed and starfish and jellyfish and all sorts of different things, more than I ever expected would be living in the middle of a city. But we've also seen some pretty sad things. I've seen a broken chair, broken bottles and glasses and things like that. Some rubbish people have just thrown in the water. And the other interesting thing that we actually see around our museum is our boats. We're so used to seeing the top half of our boats when they're sticking out of the water. With our ROVs, we can actually go and look what's below the water. So like their rudders and their motor and their propellers. So we can see how they go, which is quite interesting. And we can see what sea life is maybe growing on them as well. So we know when it's time to give them a bit of a clean. All right, here's a question as well. What happens if a storm comes up while the ROV is in the water? So like any outdoor activity, we've got to stay safe. So if it's just some rain, that's okay. I've used the ROVs in the rain. As I've said, they're totally waterproof. It doesn't matter. But if it's going to be a storm, we don't want to be outside and get wet, particularly not around an area where there's lots of tall, pointy things like masts of ships that may potentially be a spot where there might be lightning. So if there was a storm and an ROV is in the water, what we do is we'd stop what we were doing, drive it back to us, and actually just take it out of the water and finish another day. So you've got to make sure you stay safe. So we've got a question here. What do the letters ROV stand for? We touched on it at the beginning. It's called a remote operated vehicle because, of course, it's driven by a remote control. Now, some scientists will also use something called autonomous underwater vehicles, which you basically program with a set of instructions that they have to do, and then they'll end up at the spot you've told them to. So those are different. Those aren't driven by remote controls, but ROVs are remote operated vehicles, which means we can see something interesting, we can tell it to stop, we can tell it to go back, we can kind of direct it to where we want it to go, and it gives us a lot of control in what we're doing. So ROV stands for remote operated vehicle. And here's a question from Miss Elliott. Turn it on and off. It's got an on and off switch. Nice and simple. So when we plug the ROV into the controller, it's got an on-off switch on the controller, and that will also turn on the ROV. Which is pretty clever. All right, from Ollie at Kangaroo Island, how long is the ROV cord? So the ROV cord that we have here is only 75 meters, but we could get a longer one if we wanted to go down deeper. But we don't really need it here. At the Maritime Museum, the water is between 4 and about 10 meters deep. So we definitely don't need any longer, but the cord that we currently have for this ROV is 75 meters. All right, from Miss McMahon, has an ROV ever seen a giant squid? I would think so. So not our ROVs, we don't go deep enough to find giant squid, but I'm sure there are lots and lots of science and research vessels around the world who are exploring our oceans. And I'm sure there's been an ROV that's seen a giant squid. Oh, here's an interesting one from Bendina Public School. If it only goes 200 meters down, how does it find shipwrecks? So this particular model, this particular type of ROV is only going 200 meters down. Other types of ROVs can go a lot deeper. So Sebastian of RV Falco can go 4,500 meters down. And so different shipwrecks are at different depths. Did you know that there are some shipwrecks that you can actually just snorkel and you might be over the top of? There are shipwrecks on beaches around Australia and things like that that are really, really shallow. There are shipwrecks that, humans can scuba dive in and places like that. So some shipwrecks are really shallow. Other shipwrecks are really, really deep. So the Titanic is so deep that humans can't scuba dive to it. We would get squished by the pressure. So you'd also need to design different ROVs depending on which shipwrecks you wanted to go to. A question from Bundina Public School. Have I found any new species? No, I'm actually not a marine biologist. I'm a teacher. So I love using them just to kind of have a look around and be amazed. But scientists have used ROVs to actually discover new species. They can also sometimes use ROVs to get water samples and samples of different species at different depths in the ocean and things like that.
Megan, there are a couple of questions about how long it takes to build one. So a few people have asked that one.
Yeah, thank you for that. There are so many questions. You guys are absolutely so impressed. How long it takes to build one? It depends. It varies. But it's something that you can actually, people who create ROVs spend years and years and years making it better and better and better and better and better. And so ROVs have been used for quite a few decades, and they keep getting better as they go. How long it actually takes to put one together if you've already designed it, I'm not actually 100% sure. Maybe that's something I'll have to look up for the next time we do one of these. Well, here's a question from Kangaroo Island again. Does the camera have a flash? It doesn't have a flash, but it does have lights. So attached to the camera in here is some lights. And we also have another one of these ROVs that has lights on the outside. So, for example, if we were using it at nighttime, we could actually turn the lights on to be able to see what was below the water. So this particular ROV has permanent lights that just are LED and are just always on. So you can get nice videos and photos with those. And here's a question. If I was to come to the museum in person, would it be possible to test using an ROV? Absolutely. So at certain times through the year, and the next one is this weekend, our family programs team will have some times where people, families, kids, anyone can actually come and have a go at using them. Sometimes it's free. Sometimes you might have to pay for a session that you can book out just for yourself. And we actually let people come and we teach them how to drive them around. We also have in the past had a few times with schools coming and using them as well. And we also are trying to think about different ways that we can actually engage schools with driving them around at the museum.
A general one as well, Megan, that's come through a few times is what happens if the cord breaks or gets tangled and you can't untangle it?
Yes, so that's kind of, if the cord was to break, that would be pretty bad. What we would have to do is we'd have to go and find where the ROV was and try and retrieve it. That may even mean having to get someone to get a scuba diver to go and rescue it. Often these ROVs, the water in Sydney Harbour is really, really salty. So even though we try to add additional weights, they do tend to float back up to the surface a little bit. So it will eventually, as long as it's not caught on something, hopefully pop back up on the surface so we can try and find it. And then we actually can, if I turn it around, we can kind of take all this back part apart and actually take the tether off and actually replace it. So if the tether was to break, but the rest of the ROV was still okay, we could actually take it and we could get a new tether, a new cord, and put a new one and connect it in. So the tether does also get stuck on things. So particularly around the museum, we have lots of pylons and things in the water, lots of oysters, and it can actually get stuck and caught. So the good thing about this ROV, which is a bit hard to see because it's on the table, lift it up, you can actually see it's got a claw. And so we can actually use the claw to try and get the tether unstuck off whatever it's caught on. It takes a bit of practice. Sometimes it takes a while, but we actually can use the claw to try and get it unhooked. With the old ROVs, the white one here, it actually doesn't have a claw or anything. So there was one time when we actually had to leave it in the water overnight, and the next day someone who knew how to scuba dive was able to go and rescue it and actually get it uncaught from the thing that it was caught on. And I also saw a question here about why we got rid of these white ones. They stopped working. Because one big engineering challenge that you have to think about when you're designing anything that goes in the water is rust and corrosion. So metal actually has a chemical reaction with water, and it's a bit more complicated, but it actually corrodes and it breaks. I'm sure most people have seen things that are rust, they're all red and it's starting to break. And so the things like the motors, the metal bits in the propellers, they're all breaking, and we have to keep replacing them again and again and again. And it gets to the point where you just can't replace everything anymore. It's kind of broken. And so these white ROVs, because we've used them so much, they've actually got to the point where all of the metal parts in them have corroded, have rusted, and they don't work particularly well anymore. And because the company no longer exists, we can't just buy some new ones. So that's why we bought a different one. But we also, sometimes having a different one's good because it does different things. So it's different to drive around. Yeah. And so it's quite interesting to kind of think about the two different designs, and neither of them is right, neither of them is wrong. And we often see that as well with other types of technology as well, different types of computers and cars and all this sort of stuff. There's lots of different designs that do different things. Let me see.
There's been a few general ones as well, Megan, about animals eating them or animals being scared by them, or how they avoid animals. Like, I would assume the animals get out of their way most of the time.
Yeah, so particularly in the harbour, fish do tend to run away from them. But you think about it, it's any big thing in the water. Animals do the exact same thing for most if there's a scuba diver. And in fact, I've actually got an old-fashioned scuba diver helmet here, which is actually very scary. I think if you saw someone wearing this in the water, you'd be incredibly scared. So yes, all of the sea creatures I've kind of found have generally run out of the way when they can, or swum out of the way if they can. So fish and things like that. We do sometimes have jellyfish, and of course jellyfish can't swim out of the way. So the ROV, as it moves through, you just kind of drive it slowly, and it just kind of pushes the jellyfish to the side and out of the way. And you just be careful that you're not going to run into something like a starfish that also can't get out of the way. But for most things like fish that we see, and if we were to ever see something like a seal or seabirds that might be on the surface of the water, they tend to be scared, because it is a thing that's moving through the water that could, they think, potentially hurt them. So most animals get out of the way. And the other thing is, particularly if for people, scientists who are using them in the deep, dark oceans, ROV has lights on them, which would also scare off some of the sea creatures and things like that. So scientists have to be aware of that. If they've got their lights on that would allow them to see the sea creatures, it may also scare some sea creatures away. So scientists have to do that as well. Here is a question: what if seaweed gets stuck on the camera? Well, seaweed could potentially get stuck on this camera window, but it's nice and smooth and there's nothing really for it to get caught on. What seaweed does get stuck in on both of our ROVs is in the propellers. So you can see in here, we've got some propellers the seaweed can actually very easily get stuck in the propellers. So what happens is when that happens, an error message comes up on the screen and tells you that something's not working properly. So often the propeller will actually stop working. And this is where sometimes we have to use this tether to pull it back to us and then take it out of the water and very, very carefully pull out the seaweed, or you might get a stick to kind of poke it if you can't reach it, to pull out the seaweed to get it all unstuck. So the seaweed doesn't really get stuck on the camera. It's nice and smooth, but it does get stuck in the propellers. And that's where you have to stop what you're doing, take it out of the water, get the seaweed out, and then start again.
So Megan, I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions.
Yeah, I think so. And I've been absolutely amazed by all of these questions, and I'm so sorry if we don't get a chance to answer yours. Karen, do you want to pick the last 2?
Oh, there's too much pressure. I think there was a few that were very sort of overlapping in terms, and the few people, were talking about the future of ROVs. So I suggested they might want to design what the future of the ROVs could look like. And yeah, there was a lot about sort of the cost of them, as well as linking to a lot of concerns about what you've seen underwater and damage and those kinds of things. So I think we have covered a lot of those, and certainly that cost is a varied one. So how about I'm going to go right to a new question that I haven't looked at yet.
Well, I will just say on the cost thing, they also vary as well. So something like scientists on a research vessel use is millions of dollars. When we originally bought these very basic ROVs, they were a couple of $1,000s. But they also, the quality hasn't been great. We've had to replace a lot of the parts in them, and the company no longer exists, unfortunately. So our good ROVs are about $20,000 each. So it's a reasonable investment, but thankfully for us at the museum, it's worth it for their educational potential, but it's not something that a whole lot of individual people are really going to go out and buy just for fun.
Well, Chris is building one as a project and he would love some more advice. So Chris, my recommendation is we're going to be sending an email with a copy of the recording and some follow-up resources. I think email back to us, and then Megan, I can pass it on to Megan but to have a bit of a conversation, because it's not a simple answer. But I think everything that Megan's covered today about waterproof, future proofing, having things that can help it untangle itself, all of those kinds of things, a good camera, and as you saw, the 2 different designs, really there's a lot of variety to choose from there.
Yeah, and definitely. And I think a lot about when we think about designing an ROV as well is we may also not be able to build it ourselves. It's all about coming up with the ideas, and maybe in the future, when we get a bit more technical skills as well, because there's a lot of different components in an ROV like this as well. But even just coming up with some ideas for your own ocean technology and things like that can be a fun exercise to do.
Absolutely. And Jessica just put something in the Q&A there about what if it had a little arm that it could pick up rubbish. So, what a great addition as an ROV that's actually helped cleaning up the ocean as well. And don't worry, Chris, about emailing. The email will go to your parents and they can respond for you. So I think, thank you so much, Megan. That was so fascinating, and I've not seen that many questions and comments come through for a session for a long time. So I'm glad you're all inspired, and either like Chris as a homeschool group or in your classroom, design the future of ROVs. I love the idea that they can help clean up the ocean as well. What other features could you add that could be really great for our marine environments?
Definitely. And I'll definitely also email Karen, a few extra different resources and different activities that you might like to do either in Science Week or in the future that's all about kind of our oceans and technology. And there's some resources that I created with another organisation as well that could help inspire you as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Megan. Thank you to everyone that's joined us again for SciFest, and we look forward to seeing you again for future sessions. So thanks, everyone, and we will see you again soon.